If you keep your Bibles open to that passage in 1 Samuel chapter 21, that's on page 1 Samuel chapter 21. It's on page 284. I'll also be referring at some point to this psalm that's recorded inside the bulletin as well there. 1 Samuel chapter 21 there. Have you heard the expression, the only thing that stays the same is constant change? Yes, constant change. What about constant change is here to stay? Yes, constant change is here to stay. At every stage of life, there seems to be constant change. And for some, it's the dramatic upheaval through sickness or moving home or changing employment. And for others, it might be the subtle changes of ageing bodies. But ageing bodies at both end of the life spectrum. For many among us in this congregation, you belong to what is known as the sandwich generation. And what I mean by that is that stage in life where you are both raising children with their growing bodies, as well as looking after ageing parents with their declining ones. And so the unique challenges that brings means that you belong to the sandwich generation. Now, I've passed my sandwich generation. Both of my parents have passed away, but I've passed through it. But there are unique challenges that come along with that. And then, of course, there are the changes in our local community and even the changing dynamics here in amongst our congregation as we welcome some and farewell others each year. Now, as we navigate through the changing seasons of life, do you feel at times kind of like a fugitive, always on the run from one thing to the next, all day long, looking for safety but never quite finding it? Well, let's see what this passage says today about how to live in an ever-changing world as we navigate through the changes of life and see what was going on in the life of David and how he reflected on the changes that were going on for him. Now, so far in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel, we've been shown that God is introducing the role of a king into the nation, and the first king, Saul, reflected the character of the people in his defiant disobedience, but he was rejected by God, and another king in waiting was anointed, who did reflect the character of God. But a tension remained between the current King Saul and the king-elect David. And seeing David as a threat among other attempts, Saul tried to kill him 3 times with a spear. Now, he wasn't a very good shot, and David was able to escape, fled to his home, but even there he had to escape from his home, and he did that through a window while his wife stalled his pursuers, and he got away. He tried to find refuge with the prophet Samuel. But even there, Saul sent men to capture him there as well. And so last week, chapter 20 ended with Saul's son Jonathan siding with David, but warning him to flee from Saul's relentless, defiant intent to kill him. And the rest of 1 Samuel sees David on the run as a fugitive from Saul, constantly looking for safety. And first he goes, verse 1 of chapter 21, David went to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Now, Ahimelech was a great-grandson of Eli that we heard about earlier in the book. And he trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" He's a bit concerned. And in a nutshell, in this section of the passage, David went on to deceive him with a fake story about why he was there. And as much as we hold up David as the king, there is still lots of things about his character that were very questionable. And Ahimelech believed him, and he stocked him up with some bread and a weapon, none other than the sword of Goliath. Now, have you heard another expression, out of the frying pan and into the fire? That's right. Now, trying to escape one bad situation and you end up in a worse position. Well, that's what happens to David. For look where he ends up next in verse 10. That day, David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now, of all the places David would have been the most hated, it would be in Gath. Why Gath? Well, you might recall that Gath is whose hometown? Does anybody know? Goliath's hometown, the Goliath who David killed with a stone and a sling in chapter 17, and when he chopped off his head. He knocked him down with a stone and then chopped off his head with his own sword. But in his desperation, David here is looking for safety. And David feared Saul more than he feared the Philistines. So he crosses over into enemy territory. Now, of course, what was David carrying with him? Goliath's sword, the distinctive sword of their slain hometown hero, Goliath. What was he thinking? The very sword David had used to cut off Goliath's head. Now, perhaps hoping to go undercover or something, to sneak in on his own, maybe put his head over his thing and, go incognito. He goes in, but the servants, verse 11, the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." Now, back in chapter 18, Saul had hoped the Philistines would do his dirty work for him and knock off David in battle. But now, because of David's reckless move, Saul's hopes might just come true. And of all the life-threatening situations David found himself throughout 1 Samuel, it's interesting that chapter 21 is the only time that David's fear of those threats is actually mentioned. What was going through his mind as he was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath? Now, often sports stars or politicians or other people who have experienced things that are well known write memoirs to record their thoughts on events that have been in the public eye. We see things from the outside perspective, but they reflect things and give us an insight from the insider's perspective. And in a similar kind of way, David has written some things from an insider's perspective that we get to see what was he thinking, what was going through his mind as he's experiencing some of these things as a fugitive on the run. And he does that by writing some psalms that reflect what he was thinking. And one example of that is in Psalm 56 that he wrote when he was very much afraid of the king of Gath. As he reflected back on that time when he finally got a chance to slow down, he was able to write down a few things. And as I read a part of it now, see if you can pick up what words are repeated. I'm going to read about four verses. See if what words are repeated. "Be merciful to me, my God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. My adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride many are attacking me. All day long they twist my words. All their schemes are for my ruin. They conspire, they lurk, they watch my steps, hoping to take my life." All day long. Did you get the all day long? Yes, maybe. All day long. Do you get that feeling sometimes? Do you sometimes get that feeling all day long? Everything is unrelenting with no end in sight. As soon as you get through one thing, something else crashes in. It's just all day long. You finally somehow put your head on the pillow and think, how did I get through the day? I spent all day yesterday at the hospital with my son who dislocated his toe, and I went for the doctor and then I went to the x-ray and then went to the hospital and backwards, and there's lots of things go all day long, lots of things going on. Finally got it sorted. But now David is well known for playing the musical lyre, and he plays it with Saul back in the more happy days in the temple in his court. But now, in an act of desperation, it is not the lyre that he plays, but he plays the fool. Look at the way he plays the fool in verse 13 of 1 Samuel chapter 21. So he pretended to be insane in their presence, and while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Desperate straits call for desperate measures. Can David pull this off? What was it? Can he pull it off? He is in fear of his life in enemy territory here. And Achish said to his servants, "Look at the man, he's insane. Why bring him to me? Now, to all appearances, this man, crazy man David, is no threat. The attendants brought him to the king and said, "This is the king of the land," who said he kills tens of thousands. And just like a classic catch in cricket, check out this classic question in verse 15. "Am I so short of madmen?" he says. "Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house? Am I so short of madmen?" Well, he wasn't actually that mad, actually, because he wasn't short of madmen, to be honest, because he was surrounded by people mad enough to fall for David's ruse, as they let public enemy number one escape by the skin of his teeth, or in David's example, by the saliva dripping down his beard. That's how he escaped. I can't believe it. And they let him go. And then after the adrenaline had calmed down in David's life and he reflected on the enormity of what he just got out of, he wrote and reflected some things. And that also is recorded in Psalm 56. And this is what he says here in Psalm 56. "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Whose word I praise. The word David probably had in mind here was what he had heard at his anointing by the prophet Samuel earlier in the book. "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." They are the words that he heard in his ears, that he was anointed to be the king. And he found confidence in knowing that despite his own foolishness in seeking refuge in the king of Gath, God's purpose for him to be king would stand. But check out what else he found comfort in here. Further down there, and it's inside the bulletin there, "You have kept count of my tossings." That's a translation there. "Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book?" The tossings in the night from the wandering uncertainties of life and the accompanying tears are all known to God. It's a rich image, isn't it? The tossings and turnings. And the language of the bottle. It's almost like God has a bottle on a shelf for each one of us, and in it is our tears. He knows. He knows. And brothers and sisters, regardless of how others might be indifferent to our pain, there is a safety in knowing that our tossings, our tears, are all counted by God, and they mean something to him. And although David had escaped from Gath, he was still on the run. It wasn't safe necessarily, and he was still all alone. But not for long, as there are others looking for safety with the king. Chapter 22 now, we're going through this very, very fast. Chapter 22, verse 1, "David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam." Now, probably also running from Saul because of their connection to David, when his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. They went down to him there. But they weren't the only ones that went down to him there. And the only ones that disgruntled with Saul or escaping from Saul. Verse 2 also says, "All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented," the 3 Ds, distressed, debt, discontented, gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. And David becomes a refuge for those with nothing to gain in Saul's world. And then with his personal family connections through his great-grandmother Ruth, David seeks refuge for his parents in Moab as he takes care of his elderly parents. And then through the prophet Gad, he is told to go into the land of Judah. So lots of things on the run. And even though he's still being pursued all day long, this is all the time that Saul's still pursuing all day long, David is coming to realise over time that the safety that he's looking for is not found within himself and his own devious craftiness, but in God whose word he trusts. And his thoughts to that end are reflected in Psalm 57 as he writes, verse 1 and 2 of Psalm 57. Let me read it out for you. This is what he says. "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me. For in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by. I cry out to the God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. To God who fulfills his purpose for me. Let's think about that for a moment. He's actually crying out and thanking God for fulfilling his purpose for him. But let's think about his life so far. He's from a child and as a young teenager, he was banished out in the cold and heat of the wilderness to take care of the family sheep. All day long, at risk of attack by lions and bears. Then covertly anointed as king of Israel by the prophet Samuel, but while still assigned to a menial task within his family, he's used by God to bring about this unexpected downfall of the mighty Goliath on the battlefield. He ends up in the king's court, where in fits of jealous rage, the king tries to kill him. He flees for his life. He gets caught in Goliath's hometown, of all places. Somehow miraculously escapes. But now he hides in the darkness of this cave at risk of Saul killing him at first opportunity, as well as the Philistines across the border if given another chance. And here he is saying and thanking God. Men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords, is the language he uses in Psalm 57. But yet David speaks of a God who fulfills his purpose for him. I'm not sure that's the type of purpose I would like to aspire to in my life. But in David's case, that purpose includes giving him the kingdom. And that looks impossible from the darkness of this cave where he dwells. But the theme of great reversals running through the book of 1 Samuel keeps glowing like the fire in a dark cave. For God does not see things as man sees them, but from the perspective